we are very happy. All the Circul'R team is very happy to welcome you to this event. We are my name is Mathieu, and I'm leading the Circul'R Club, which is basically a community of 40 multinationals and 40 startups to share best practices around circular economy. I lead this community together with Morgan, who is connected with us today and who is doing a lot of the work to prepare the events like this one. To tell you a bit about also the background, and in every event that we organize, we share best practices. And this time we decided to make a unique event just for Paul Polman, because we thought he has a lot of things to say and share about leadership. And I will introduce him in a few minutes. Paul, just to make sure, are you with us now or not yet? Okay. He will join us in a minute. Maybe, Morgan, you can try to call David if you want, if that's fine for you.
Yes, Paul is checking now.
Ah, perfect. So I'll wait just a few minutes while he connects so that I can make the proper introduction. But I see familiar faces and new faces as well. So I'm very happy and pleased to see different people and new people coming and jumping on this event. So I'm very happy for that. Okay.
Hi, guys.
Oh, hello, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Sorry to be slightly late, Mathieu, but I had to start up my computer again for some reason. I'm at my son's house and he needed a different password, so apologies.
Okay, no problem. I see you have a great view behind you.
I know. I'm actually in New York. This view is better than New York, that I can tell you.
Definitely. Well, we're very happy. I'm doing fine. I'm doing fantastic. We've got around 70, almost 80 people connected now, and more will join later. We're very happy to welcome you today to this event. We've got a lot of things to say and to share. So I'm actually excited, and why am I'm excited? Because I've been expecting this interview for 10 years. I'm not very young, but I used to quote you in my business ethic essays and say, Paul Polman said we have to decouple growth from environmental impact and such things. So now I feel it's quite an honor. And of course, I heard a lot about you and your leadership from my father, Bruno, who also worked at Unilever. So I'll try for the audience first to introduce a little bit about your background. But I have to apologize in advance because you have done so many things that otherwise I would take the whole hour to talk about your experience. But you started
We can get straight into it. Don't make it too long.
Okay, fine. But you started, I think the start is always interesting. You started as a cost analyst in 1979, right, at Procter & Gamble. And then you spent 27 years at Procter. And then you became the CEO of Unilever. And you worked there for 10 years as a CEO. And what you did there was very interesting because you managed to successfully prove that you can have a strong environmental and social impact vision, and that it can also lead to a very healthy business with good financial returns. So that was very interesting. And from there, you did a lot of other things. Among them, you co-founded Imagine, which we can see the name behind you. And you will talk to us a little bit more about it later. And you also became the vice chair of the UN Global Compact, I believe, and the honorary chair of the International Chamber of Commerce. So you did a lot of things. But my first question for you, Paul, is about the role of businesses in our society. Because we live in a world where there is increasingly scarce resources and increasing inequalities. What is the role of businesses? What is their responsibility in the society? And what does better business actually look like for you in practical terms?
Yeah, no, thanks, Matthew. And the respect is mutual. I was actually looking forward to this. First of all, I've had a great 10 years with your dad as well. We were great colleagues and we're still in touch. And the reason I'm talking to you probably with all the requests I'm getting has something to do with your dad as well. So we should be grateful for that. And as passionate about the outdoors as anybody else, and living in harmony with nature. I've also looked a little bit at what you are doing, and I have to congratulate you as well, especially the latest campaigns that you worked on cigarette butts in the Paris streets, that you collected in just a few hours' time, and then having the courage to swim in the sand and follow the traces of a cigarette butt to make it come alive. It's without any doubt one of the top plastic polluters that we have. I think we're able to discard about 18 billion cigarette butts a day in this world, and many end up in the wrong places. And drawing some attention to that is a good thing. Obviously, we should all stop smoking. That would be probably the better solution for everybody, but that might be a little bit difficult to achieve. But keep going and be a continuous campaigner, because that's ultimately the only way we change this world for the better. You know, the coming to your question, the signs of the failing system were even obvious before the pandemic, and I think it got significantly worse the last 10 years. COVID probably set us back even further. The bigger issues I'm talking about are inequality and climate change. If I start with climate, perhaps, it's very clear that we are well overshooting the planetary boundary. Last year, World Overshoot Day was August 22nd, which means that after that day, we're using more resources than the world can replenish, which frankly, in my terminology, means we're stealing from future generations. Only 9% of all materials we use in this world gets reused. 91% goes into landfills, incinerations, or increasingly oceans, which is absolutely absurd. And then, not surprisingly, with our linear production patterns, instead of the circular that I know you all passionately fight for, with our linear production patterns, in the last 5 decades, we probably have extinct 68% of our mammals or fish or birds or reptiles, amphibian population. Some people call it the 6th greatest extinction. And it's just a matter of time to make it us be the next one in line. You know, it's some people have said, you know, this is a finite planet, and you cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet, and anything you can do infinitely is by definition sustainable. So that's really challenge number one. And challenge number two is inequality. It's actually both sides of the same coin, in my opinion. What COVID has shown once more is that the people that always suffered, that are already bearing the brunt of our incompetence in of these areas, are actually suffering more. 4.3 billion people in this world still live on less than $5 a day. COVID has shown us 1.6 billion vulnerable workers, 120 million to 150 million driven back into extreme poverty. And the statistic that gets me the most is really, even during COVID, the workers have lost about $3.7 trillion in earnings, whilst the billionaires actually gained $3.9 trillion in earnings. That's more than enough to give everybody a vaccine, avoid the 800 million people that still go to bed hungry from going to bed hungry, and putting the 242 million children that are still not in school in education. Now, the cost of our failings has been tremendous. If you look at COVID alone, the global economy has contracted with between 3.5% and 4%. We have lost about $28 trillion in economic output. Just the US and Europe has put in $16 trillion in rescue and stimulus packages. So I think, you know, the cost of failure has also become very transparent. It is at a point, I believe right now, that we are spending more money because we are not acting than what we should spend to avoid these issues in the first place. COVID showed that you can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet, but it also showed that a lot of the governments were incapable of dealing with these challenges. So coming to your question and bringing it to the private sector, I think the private sector has a big role to play in building it back better. They are 65% of the GDP, 80% of the job creation, 90% of the financial flow now. If we don't involve the private sector it's impossible that we can change the curve of destiny and invest behind the right things. Now, I believe it's in the interest of business as well. Excuse me. Business needs the sustainable development goals, and the sustainable development goals need business. People have often said that business cannot succeed in a failing society, but I also believe that business cannot be a bystander in a system that gives them life in the first place. Now, there's growing evidence that what we call shareholder primacy, if you want to, which is frankly still the prevailing current model, is increasingly a failed doctrine. It destroys, as I mentioned, both the national and environment that we desperately need, but it also destroys the social cohesion. So what does success look like? I believe successful companies understands that profits should not come from creating the world's problems, but increasingly solving them. And the first priority for these companies is to move to a more sustainable and inclusive model of growth. I think that is increasingly happening. And the second thing is that these companies put purpose on at the core. Increasingly, we're going to compete on trust, on responsibilities, on creating and maintaining these deeper relationships with stakeholders, which are rooted in true values. And companies that understand that will do well. There often is a misconception, my final sentence, that you either need to be purpose-driven or profit-driven, but that you cannot do both. And that's obviously a fallacy. In fact, it's the opposite that we have found at Unilever, that having a strong purpose statement actually fuels the profits. It's not surprising. It motivates and energizes employees, become the desired employer brand. It attracts the right people. You have more delighted, loyal, and satisfied customers. Relationships with your suppliers and your communities are much stronger. You're more innovative, most likely, and it's better outcomes. So I also think that the smarter companies understand this. The Sustainable Development Agenda now, which was approved in the UN not far from here in New York in 2015, actually had this goal to irreversibly eradicate poverty and do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. And I created a commission that only looked at 4 areas: health and well-being, energy transformation, food and land use, and mobility. And in these 4 areas alone, it found in the next 10 years an opportunity to unlock about $12 trillion of economic value and create 380 million more jobs. So companies that understand that, I think, will do very well. They know that taking bold climate action or transitioning to a circular economy, what you work on, or finding nature-based solutions, accelerating the food systems transformation, going to green energy, and all these things is actually the most profitable business model. We certainly saw that in Unilever over the 10 years that we had our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which we can refer to later. We saw our shareholder return go up 300%. We were operating under a 19% return on invested capital. So that business model was actually a very successful and profitable model actually to operate by.
Okay, very interesting. So you're talking about first the resource, the limits we have in terms of resource, the inequalities, the role of private sector. Just to tell the audience also, we'll take the questions in the second part in pretty much 20 minutes. But before that, you were talking about Unilever, you were talking about business changing. What did you do in Unilever to transform the model?
Well, it's not concretely. It's that many people did it, your father included. So this was a team effort. But I also believe that organizations should aspire to make a bigger impact beyond the daily mundane activities. And as I said, business cannot succeed in the failing societies. I had the fortune to work on the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. I was actually part of this high-level panel that at that time Secretary General Ban Ki-moon had put together to see what the sequence should be to the Millennial Development Goals. The Millennial Development Goals had achieved its objective of halving the number of people in poverty, and this plan was actually going to finish that, and that's what's called the Sustainable Development Goals. And the more I worked on this for 2.5 years with a group of other amazing people, the more I realized what a power that is if I put it in the middle of the Unilever model and make that the key driver. When I joined Unilever, I think many people will realize the company wasn't in really good shape. It had had terrible 10 years, I would believe. Shareholder value had not increased. It had become a little bit of a victim of shareholder primacy, chasing its tail, becoming more short term. So we had to bring growth back, and this was at the height of the financial crisis. In the financial crisis, I could already see very clearly the symptoms of an economic system not working. High levels of debt at private and at government level, enormous overconsumption, too many people left behind. And at that time, you could already see that any system where too many people are left behind or not participating will ultimately rebel against itself. And and unfortunately, the governments didn't take the lessons of the financial crisis. People felt that banks were too big to fail and people were too small to matter. We saw inequality continuing to go up, climate change being attacked. And I didn't want to be part of that. I have children, I have grandchildren. I just didn't want to be part of that. So we said, why don't we create a company that has a positive impact, that actually operates with a mindset of being regenerative or restorative, if you want to, not making things less bad. Making things less bad is still very bad. So what we worked on is, the first of all, is finding our purpose. We went back to the roots, to Lord Lever, that created the company and had as purpose making hygiene commonplace. In Victorian Britain, 1 out of 2 babies died after year 1. That's why he invented the bar soap. So we made this adaptation and called it making sustainable living commonplace. Then we put it in the core of our strategy. We said to people, this is our strategy. This is not CSR, which is about risk management or in a little department for some parts of the business that you could control. No, this is taking responsibility of your total handprint in society, not only the footprint, your whole value chain. We were in the food business, so we said we're going to take responsibility for deforestation, stunting, food security, obesity. It's a hard work, but we put it in the middle of our strategy, all of our brands, all of our countries. Then we worked very hard to create the transparency, where we should focus on. Every brand was measured across that value chain to see what its impact was on water or waste or carbon emissions or human rights, if you want to, so that we could focus and put the right tools and accountability in place. We created the space for people to act. We stopped quarterly reporting. We stopped giving guidance. We changed our compensation systems to the longer term so that we provided space for people to act. And then we discovered, obviously, that as you take responsibility for your broader handprint in society, you also have to work in the partnerships, first across your value chain, then at industry level, but increasingly these broader partnerships with the NGO community and governments. And this is what we did. And obviously, ultimately, the main driver coming out of that was highly engaged people, strong values, the right behavior. So increasingly, we created a culture that started to work for us. The Unilever Sustainable Living Plan that we put out there, we set as a simple objective to decouple our growth from environmental impacts, because we were beyond the planetary boundaries, and to increase the overall social impact. We put 50 targets out there at that time. People said, you're crazy to put 50 targets out. But transparency drives trust, and trust is the basis of prosperity. So I felt, and many others, that putting these targets out and making them public would not only invite people in, but would also lead to that transparency. And then we went to a truly long-term, multi-stakeholder business model with purpose at its core, where shareholder value, I was very clear about that, was the result of what we were doing, was not an objective. Profit is a little bit like, what shall I say, the white blood cells in your body. You need white blood cells to live, but you don't live for white blood cells. So with this making sustainable living commonplace, I think we really unlocked something. And that really has been, for us, fairly successful. Increasingly, other companies saw it. The best thing is success, because it makes other people follow you. And increasingly, we saw other companies following that path and hopefully have made a little bit of a contribution to making this a better world for all.
Okay, so basically some of the keys were, you talk about purpose, you talk about the role of transparency, setting targets as well, but you talk also about having a long-term vision. And what advice would you give to people who are focused on short-term expectations on shareholders versus the long-term vision and more stakeholder, a broader stakeholder vision? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I would. There was one other thought that went through my mind when I thought about your question that you just answered, and I think there's one other thing I wanted to mention is that the most important thing at the end of the day was actually purpose in each of our brands, moving from just functional benefits and price competitiveness. You know, brands like Knorr by fighting for sustainable agriculture, brands like Dove for women's self-esteem, Lifebuoy for helping a child reach the age of 5 by the simple act of hand washing. Domestos was attacking the issues of open defecation. So every brand had a purpose, and that was obviously the great unlock. The stronger the purpose on the brands, by the way, the better these brands were doing, growing faster and more profitable. So coming to the short term and the long term, of course, we have to have a short term. We have to pay the bills. We have to pay the salaries. The company needs to perform. But you need to do that by consistently performing and focusing on these drivers that allow you to do that consistently for the longer term. If you start to say, I want to be around for the longer term, then automatically you have to make sure that the world allows you to be around, that you can get the resources that you need, that society embraces you because you're having a positive impact. So if you have a long-term business model, it automatically brings you, I think, also to think more sustainably. But there are people that, you know, obviously are very short-term oriented, especially in the financial market, and make their money on the shorter term speculations. But there's an evidence that short-termism in business, in my opinion, has run its course. When I was born, the average lifetime of a publicly traded company was 67 years. Now it's only 15 years. The average tenure of a CEO has dropped to less than 4.5 years. Most value creation in real life happens actually 5 years out or more. So although shareholder primacy is still the corrupting force because of the dominance of the financial markets and the fact that we have put way too much money in the economies, it is actually a failed doctrine. And you see that companies that have operated short term, like Rio Tinto was the destruction of the Aboriginal caves in Australia, or Volkswagen with the emission scandal, or Boeing preferring share buybacks than investing in their planes, or Wells Fargo cheating their clients. All these companies that were myopically focused on the shareholder, and I can name many more, have really not had a longer term success. So I would advise that if you run a business, adopt this longer term multi-stakeholder model. You're better able actually to optimize in that model the return to all stakeholders over time. And I believe also the return to the shareholders. So there are some things that you can do just to be practical that we did in Unilever. The first thing is its governance. We did that with our board and made it very clear that our fiduciary duty was to the longer term survival of the company and its success, not its short term. You can look at incentives. Most of the CEOs, average salaries of the CEOs have at best 18 months of a horizon on average, which is ridiculous. In Unilever, we moved to a 5-year horizon and created this longer term perspective. The third thing you can do is engagement, work on the engagement with the investment community. We actively seeked the right investors and disinvited the short-term investors. And we saw a significant change in our investor base over these 10 years of time. And then obviously your strategies, you have to explain your strategies for the longer term. If we go into China or into Africa, we build a factory, the returns will only be there in 5, sometimes in 10 years. And then the most difficult thing, at least when we started, is the fifth thing I would say, is to have these metrics that are linked to value creation. When we started at Unilever, it was an act of faith. We knew it was the right thing that we had to do, but we had a hard time still explaining that to the investment community. But now you can show that more gender diverse companies are better performing, or companies that internalize the climate change issues are better performing. So the data, the metrics are increasingly more convincing.
Okay, very interesting around those 5 key points. In 2019, you started a new business after your adventure in Unilever, and it's called Imagine. You co-created, I think it's a social business, right?
Yeah, so
why did you shift from being a CEO to being a social entrepreneur again? and what's the purpose exactly of this new company?
Well, even when I was a CEO, we started some foundations. I have one
Okay.
of the bigger foundations in Africa for blind people called Kilimanjaro Blind Trust. I encourage people to look at their website. But we have 25,000 blind children in school there to ensure that they get the same opportunities as us. And we call it Unlocking Literacy for Life. And then I have some other foundations that I work on. So I've always been a little bit of an accidental CEO. And
Okay.
I was in Unilever was more or less using the size and scale of Unilever to drive these social changes. I don't think that is different from the objectives of a social entrepreneur, to be honest. With that difference is that we didn't need to ask other people for money. We could use our own money to reinvest and do good. But the reason I started Imagine was when I was a CEO, you could work on these transformations, but there were still issues. You know, if Coke did something, Pepsi didn't want to participate. You didn't have that right level of trust as a company alone. You might not have had that knowledge, the ability to convene and put these partnerships in place. And frankly, it's very difficult for companies alone to tackle these issues of deforestation or plastics in the oceans or even climate change. So Imagine is a very simple thing focused on both human transformation and systems transformation. And our theory of change is that if you bring enough CEOs together, industry sector, across the value chain, about 25 to 30%, you can actually drive systems changes. We all know that climate change and inequality are the big issues. We all try to do something to move it forward, but collectively it doesn't add up. And the reason it doesn't add up collectively is the system pushes back. The boundaries make us behave in certain ways that is not conducive. Governments might have laws, rules, and regulations that go actually in the wrong direction, like per first subsidies on fossil fuel. So having these critical masses of CEOs in the value chain, it does two things. It makes the CEOs more courageous. We call it the courageous collective, and that's a human transformation that we need. But it also allows you to drive the systems transformation. I give you an example from France, where we have put together the Fashion Pact with 68 fashion companies globally, and they're working on getting out of single-use plastics, moving to regenerative cotton, internalizing the agreements of the Paris Accord, or staying below 1.5 degrees, and they're moving quite rapidly. In the COVID times, even looking at human rights collectively. Now they're buying green energy together. So these CEOs are driving themselves actually up to this higher common denominator versus pulling each other down. Before that, they were limited awareness of the value chain in fashion, limited responsibility of the value chain. Now with a collective like this, it changes. So what then happens? People like Brune Poisson, who was minister, or President Macron got interested. They look at circular economy laws in France. The European Commission gets interested. They put it in their Green Deal and other things, so you can drive these broader system changes. NGOs want to work with you and move things forward. So that's really the platform that we're doing with Imagine. We're doing that in food, we're doing that in fashion, we're doing that in tourist and travel, in finance, and actually we're courageously now trying to move to private equity as well. So if you talk about the change from Unilever, if you want to, I always say there is three thoughts of authority. There is bought authority. You have a lot of money, you buy it. Money in politics in the US, for example, that we are fighting, and I've written about that and other things. You have formal authority. I'm the boss, so you better listen to me because I pay your salary. Or you have moral authority. And I can tell you now that I've left Unilever, I entirely have to operate with moral authority, and it is actually better, and the impacts that you can have are significantly bigger. So this is a good time to do this for me.
Okay, where can we follow what you're doing with Imagine?
Well, we have a website.
Okay.
So there is a website. Imagine is actually came from Yoko Ono when we visited her here in New York, and we had another idea that we wanted to do. We didn't pursue that because I felt I can do more with the private sector and the impact can be bigger.
Okay.
But she said, she said very simply, you should use the word imagine. We were talking. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one, and I think we can solve these issues of society if we combine dreaming and action, and that's how we got to the name Imagine.
Amazing. And so I got a final questions before we take questions from the audience. So you talked earlier about shifting from being less bad to being better.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit more about this? I think you're writing a book on this called Net Positive, if I'm not wrong. But can you give us a little bit of thoughts around what do you mean by being net positive?
Yeah, that's right, Mathieu. There's a book that I've written. I've never wanted to write a book, but so many people were asking it. And then finally, Harvard Press, Adi, came to me and said, you have to write it. And the book is called Net Positive, How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take. And it's coming out by Harvard Press in October, but you can pre-order already now. And I certainly recommend you to look at it. It's another social enterprise again that I'm starting because I want to create a movement of net positive. As we talked before, Earth's Overshoot Day was August 22nd. So just being circular is not enough. Circular is a good intermediate step. It's like moving from coal to gas if you want to. But ultimately, you need to move to solar and wind. Net positive is the same. Companies can, you can move from CSR or less bad to being a neutral company. But in a world that already overshoots its planetary boundaries, where more people are coming in and all that stuff, you have to be positive. So for us, net positive is really a movement that describes how successful companies can actually profit from really truly solving these issues that we talked about. And for business to be successful once more, the longer term, they have to show, in my opinion, that they have this net positive impact. If they can't show they have this net positive impact, then why would the world leave them around? Why would we want these companies to be there? So it requires a different definition of performance, a more comprehensive process of value creation, if you want to, a profit construction that goes beyond the financial returns, and so obviously includes people and profit. So the interesting thing is, if you look at the characteristics of what we call these net positive companies, they do a few things, and the book describes that. The book, by the way, is as much again about human transformation and how important it is to have your own courageous leadership and what is required for that, as well as the systems transformation that is needed. But net positive companies have 5 characteristics, if I may say. First of all, they take ownership of all impacts and consequences, intended or not. Many of the companies, we've seen that in tech, they celebrate the good news, but they don't take the bad news. The Uberization of society, the negative effects of Facebook, etc. So net positive companies take responsibility of their total impact. They also, not surprisingly, operate for the long-term benefit of business and society. They create positive returns for all stakeholders, not just the shareholders. They drive shareholder value as a result, not as a goal. It is value through values, if you want to. And they forge these broader partnerships to drive these broader systems changes that I talked about. That's a difficult transition for many companies, but the book helps you, leads you through it, gives you hopefully also the personal courage, and help you transform the company. And then finally, the book doesn't shy away from the tougher choices, paying tax, corruption, human rights, trade associations you belong to that try to boycott things. Whilst you are saying the nice words, the industry is pushing in a different direction. We've seen in fossil, for example. So how do you deal with that and all that? Companies, I think, that understand this book, that embrace it, but it is actually written for everybody, will do well. And the ones that don't, we will soon meet in the graveyard of dinosaurs. So I hope you like it. I hope you get some ideas of it. And I think it will be a great life lesson for anybody who wants to have an impact in the world.
Yeah, it will be hard to wait until October for this, but we'll be patient. Anyway, thank you, Paul. Now we're going to move from questions from the audience. There was quite a few questions, and Morgan chose some for me. So Charles Montama is asking, what are the main barriers to convert companies into sustainable business practice beyond nice PR and marketing, and how to overcome them? And I think it's also, shifting from being less bad to net positive can also be interpreted as, a nice PR thing. So what are the main barriers, would you say?
So I would, for the interest of time, because the world is complex, but for the interest of time, we need to focus on three big barriers. One is your own human transformation. You know, we have too many people that play not to lose, whilst you need to play to win. You know, we set very careful targets of things that are under our control, let's say on climate change, but we know that's not enough, but we get away with it. So I think you need courageous leaders that have, you know, higher level of humanity, humility, compassion, empathy, purpose-driven, that really think multi-generational, work in partnership. So all these things that are obvious of what we talked. So the first one is a human transformation barrier, if you want to, and move from the me to the we, if you want to. Real leadership starts when you realize that by putting yourself to the service of others, you're actually better off yourself as well. The second barrier is the short-termism of the financial market. We have a global economy that's about 100 trillion. It took a little bit of a hit last year, but it's about 100 trillion to keep it simple. But we have put financial instruments out there of 400 or 500 trillion, and they're all chasing return. The fact that you have zero or negative interest rates in many parts of the world shows you that we have too much money. So here we do the crazy thing. We destroy the planet. We turn all these things that we dig out of the earth into products that we dump in the oceans to generate a lot of money. And then we have so much money that we don't know what to do with it and have negative interest rates. It's a bizarre system we have developed. So we need to move back to the financial market being subservient to the real economy instead of the other way around, and getting out of the short-termism, because you need space to address these issues of climate change, of inequality, of food security. And then the third thing is measurements. You know, we treasure what we measure. When Simon Kushner started the GDP in the 30s or 40s, he was here in the US, he said, don't use it for more than industrial output. This was the war and people wanted to measure industrial output. But he said it doesn't measure the finite resources, it doesn't measure externalities, it doesn't measure inequality. It's not a measure of human well-being. So don't use it as a measure of success. GDP is basically the balance of a company. It's Milton Friedman on steroids. So we need to move to an accounting system that includes not only financial capital, but also environmental and social capital. So those are the three main things: human transformation, financial market to the longer term, and measurements that we have. And there is some progress in this last area that we are working with the IFRS, starting now the Sustainable Standard Board, with Europe and its taxonomy and the Green Deal becoming increasingly a standard setter. So I'm moderately optimistic. We are at the point right now, it's dangerous. I can explain that separately, but it's much better than where we were before. You know, a year and a half ago, only 20% of the world had made net zero commitments on climate change. Now we have 70% of the world, 65%. It's for 2050. We need to push that to 2030. We need to get concrete actions and game plans to get us there. But we have made significant progress. Unlike the financial crisis, when we hunkered down into the Milton Friedman behavior, this COVID crisis actually has made people aware of the fact that you can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. People have understood the relationship between biodiversity, human health, inequality, climate change, the economy. So, and we've seen that companies that have run with ESG, longer term multi-stakeholder models, have done better. That's why the financial market is picking up. They're not philanthropists, but they see a big financial opportunity. So increasingly you see the funds becoming ESG funds. And the next generation wants it. With the wealth transfer, the banks are better to position themselves in the future than in the past. And now that Europe comes out with standards of what is ESG investing, etc., we might see a little bit of an acceleration. But we need our joint collective force. Now, when issues arise like this, you see 1,000 flowers blooming, but now we need to make a nice bouquet out of it. And that's really what I'm focused on, the speed and scale. And that gets actually to the heart of what Imagine is doing and what I do in some other parts of my life. Sorry for the long answer. I know it was longer than intended.
It's fine. We'll keep the big bouquet image in our head. I've got another, now it's a marketing question from Oscar Vicente, who says, from a marketing perspective, how can we marketers convince consumers and shoppers to use and buy more sustainable choices?
Well, I actually turn it around. I think marketers have lost the plot just by saying we need to convince consumers. We are not consumer citizens. And You know, you don't consume a carpet, you use a carpet. You don't consume a car, you use a car. You might consume tomatoes and some beverages, but that's about it. So I don't think we are consumers. We're citizens of this planet Earth, and we're desperately wanting to live in harmony with each other. We're desperately wanting our politicians to behave. I mean, this is a world where the children behave like adults and the adults behave like children. Even if you now see what comes out of the G7, it's disappointing. And these are actually reasonable governments. I mean, there was a debatable one from Australia, which I don't know why they keep electing them there, but that still thinks that coal is the solution to everything. But basically, the responsible governments, and still they don't do it. So the citizens of this world are demanding. Look at how many people are on the streets. Look at how how many people walk out of companies and hold their CEOs to account. Walkouts are better than boycotts if you want to. And boycotts actually are very effective, where people increasingly buy from companies that stand for more than just destroying the planet. In fact, that stand for making it a better place. So consumers are there. It's just that marketeers, I think, are now have become followers, not leaders. But if you understand, in food, all the growth in food is in organic, in bio, in neighborhood farms. There's no food growth in these processed areas anymore. Plant-based now are the new unicorns. It's not only the Impossible Burger or Beyond Burger, but I work with a company called the Live Kindly Collective that tries to obsolete chicken. And, they're plant-based chicken nuggets. I tell you, they're better than any chicken nugget I've had in my life. So there are people that understand it, that are starting to do very well in this new economy. Teslas and Orsteds are big companies that are now worth more than the Chevrons or all the other car companies combined. So it is happening. And I think that the marketeers that keep saying the consumers don't get it, I think the problem is between their two little things here and in the 10 centimeters that they need to work. But having said that, the best thing that they can do, first and foremost, is transform their own companies, have their management believe in it, have their CEOs fully behind it. A fish starts rotting at the head, and we simply don't have enough leaders that understand it. The climate action now, if you really are realistic, we celebrate everything and we've made great progress and we hold on to any good news. But at the end of the day, there's less than 10% of companies that have made true commitment to be net zero with science-based targets. There is only 2 or 3 governments that have done that. Nobody has really shown a real plan to achieve a 50% emission cut in the next 10 years. So these deep decarbonization plans, you don't need marketeers for that. That's my point. You don't need marketeers to tell me how to build the toilet when 1.5 billion people still open defecate. You don't need volunteers to tell me how to stop food waste and 800 million people go to bed hungry still, not knowing, if they wake up the next day. You don't need marketeers to tell me to give education to everybody, especially girls and women. So the issues are bigger than worrying about, can I do more? But the real marketeers are the ones that understand that we cannot push consumption just for the sake of it, that growth has to come from different things than using more resources, that people have to be part of a solution and be a movement. I wanted all of the Unilever brands to be a movement. The reason we put purpose at the core. Think about Lifebuoy being a movement for children reaching the age of 5, when 4 million children still die every year of infectious diseases like pneumonia, diarrhea, that you can simply solve with hand washing. Think about our tea brands. It's not even important what you call them, but it's a movement for damn well decent living on the tea plantations, where there is the slave labor or the child labor, where people can't even send their kids to school to get a better outlook on life. That's why we are there. That's what real marketing is all about. Marketing is with the heart, not with the brain. And we need to come back to where people now want us to be, instead of this mindless consumption that we keep pushing still in 95% of the companies. And then we keep quoting Patagonia, who tells you not to buy a coat. I mean, the issue is much deeper than that. So but if you only hire people that have come from very wealthy families that have been able to go to HEC or to Oxbridge, I'm sure that they are the ones that are going to solve it. You need to live with the people that we need to serve and spend more time with them and listening to them. Make them the marketeers. Your company would be better. in my opinion. But anyway, sorry to go on there, but
No,
you can
it's very strong.
think about it.
That's very strong. Thank you. And it was a good question also because we got a very strong answer, you know, and conviction. We've got Marc Leroux, who is saying, I would be interested in getting Paul's point of view on the recent management reshuffle at NG and Danone. Both companies have been embarking on a positive impact stakeholder capitalism journey, but seems to have stumbled on shareholders' interest. So the question is, can a listed company really behave differently in more positively if the rules of the financial games are not changing?
Oh, there are many companies now that actually are starting to embrace or are on this journey of the longer term multi-stakeholder model. And companies do better. You know, for every example of Danone, I can give you 100 examples of companies having gone bust because of short-term greed. And, you know, there are now some companies again that pay their CEO several hundred millions or, you know, or ask for support from the government to then do share buybacks. And these companies are helped into the public account increasingly so. And we see that companies now operate more sustainably actually have a higher chance of success. It isn't black and white. It doesn't mean that you automatically have success. You need to be in the right categories. You need to have, you know, the right people. You still need to have a good innovation program. You need to operate with discipline. I'm not saying Danone didn't. Danone, Emmanuel is a very good friend of mine, and the Danone question has come up a long time. I think it actually wasn't the shareholder. It was an issue at the board level more than anything else. And they had just gotten 99% approval from their shareholders to be an entreprise à mission, and which is a good statute, that, like the B Corp statute, and that is unique to France. But you know, I think a combination of being in some difficult categories, losing some market share, having a board that probably was not as strong as it should be to withstand pressure from some small shareholders that you always have. Unilever also had some small shareholders that made noise. You know, don't forget you have 1 million shareholders. There are also always some people that are, you know, you don't want to call them idiots in public, but they are people that have their own self-interest, not the companies. They want you to sell something, or they want you to split, or they want you to stand upside down. So, you know, these are companies that sell that. These are people that sell their grandmothers if they can make their bonus. So you have them, but they are very, you know, the board should push back and they should protect the CEO. I think it didn't happen here. So if you want my conclusion, it is more of an issue of the board. If there's any lesson in there, and it's also with Unilever, we were so far ahead and we were moving so many things that I worked very hard. I had a very good board, but I worked very hard to keep the board and educate the board and keep them with me. So that when we got an attack from Kraft Heinz, which was purely financial manipulation, we were focusing on millions of people. By the way, it had a shareholder return much better than Warren Buffett. So there was no reason to attack us other than I can leverage the company up 7 times, cut costs by 1/3 and lay off all the people. So we had a model of for billions of people. They had a model of a few billionaires. Said right away, this is totally ridiculous. Anything that you guys are doing, I can do myself. And you saw Kraft falling off the cliff. Their value creation was zero. It's a great big write-offs. Warren Buffett said was my worst investment I ever made. It shows you what short-termism does. I'm glad we got rid of them after a weekend, but I could only do that because I had my board with me. And obviously all the other stakeholders started speaking up, who we were catering to also, because they could see that it would threaten the optimization of stakeholders. And actually it would have threatened the longer term shareholder value creation. If you look at Unilever since that went up about 50% in share price, Kraft Heinz went down 67% in share price. And the same happened with ABI InBev. They haven't created any value in 10 years other than creating a few billionaires. So I don't want to be part of that. They offered me 100 million to seal the deal, and I could retire and live in the south of France and buy a nice house in Cap Ferrat and in Mathieu and talk about the good old times. But, you know, I told them I will take all your money and spend it against you because this is the cancer of society. That's exactly what we have to correct. And I'm glad that Unilever survived. I'm actually glad that Danone has now Antoine de Saint-Affrique, who used to work with me, like your dad, for 7-8 years in Unilever before he took on a great job in Barry Callebaut, where he also tried to move to a more responsible model on cocoa and Ivory Coast and all the things you're familiar with. So he's a worthy successor of Emmanuel, and And I think he will stay the course, and in his own way, but he will stay the course.
So it'll be very interesting to follow what they're doing. So thank you.
Yeah. They certainly can count on my help, because you want them to be successful.
Definitely. And you talked about B Corp. I think it was also a question that was asked. What do you think about the B Corp movement?
B Corp is a great movement. Jay and is a great friend who started it, and I actually introduced him into many places in Europe, like the UK, etc. I'm a big supporter. In fact, if I start a company now, I'd make it a B Corp. And if I would start doing something, I'd probably create my company around these principles. They are playing an incredible role to bring back the sanity around corporate governance, and that's probably their biggest impact. And then having a critical mass of these companies out there. They're small companies, but I think they punch above their weight. We've been fortunate enough, when I was at Unilever, we made 67 acquisitions, and fortunate enough to get some B Corps. We had Ben & Jerry's, obviously, but then we got Seventh Generation or Puma or Sundial and some others that actually were very a fresh breath of air, you might say, coming into the company, and they made Unilever better. So actually, I always said, they acquired Unilever, Unilever didn't acquire them. But they're agile, they're close to the consumers, they understand what marketing is, if you want to have my answer. They put these responsible models out there. We now need to find a way to scale the B Corp. Danone was trying to do that, it was White Wave, and we have Tura in Brazil, which is another big company, but we have very few big companies. And partly it has been their own fault, because a lot of these smaller companies that became B Corps, they despised a little bit the bigger multinationals. They felt nearly by being a big multinational, you cannot be a B Corp. I think we've come a long way now, so I hope more and more companies will be of size, will become B Corps, but more importantly, that countries change. France has changed some things around shareholder protection. We need Europe to step up. We have corporate governance that is probably needs some help from having the right frameworks in place as well. When I dealt with the Kraft Heinz thing, I immediately went to that time to Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister in the UK, and I had a few meetings with her, and I showed her how destructive it was for the economy. And she said, this shows you how ignorant politicians are, because she said to me, I don't get it, because we have a lot of inward investment into the UK. I said, haven't you ever looked at the money, what is being, where it's being spent? That money in to buy companies who would then close the research centers and everything and their headquarters in the UK. So it looked like there was money coming into the UK, but they were basically plundering the bank, because the pound was low because of Brexit. That's also what was attractive to Kraft Heinz. But governments need to think a little bit more in a more nuanced definition than the free markets or the laissez-faire, laissez-passer mentality.
Okay, and we have a final question from DG. I don't know, it's the name of one of the participants.
Right.
What is the role and strategy of Unilever regarding putting circular economy at the heart of their model?
I wish my name would be DG and life would be fun. But anyway, the DG, we were actually the co-founders with Ellen MacArthur of her institute, and one of the reports we put out was that the plastics economy already, and probably were one of the first companies making these commitments, although not enough. If I look back now, it was actually amazing how naive we were, though we thought we were far ahead of the rest. It simply wasn't enough. But no, I support them highly, and circularity is a very important concept that you need to keep pushing. That has to be a starting point. Nature is designed without waste. Nature doesn't know waste. And so waste is created by human beings. And if it's created by human beings, it can also be unwound by human beings. So that's the good thing. In Unilever, I decided that at one point in time, I talked to our factory or manufacturing director, who was called Pierluigi Sigismondi. And I said, why don't we try to run all of our factories at zero waste? We had 572 factories, including the contractors. About half of them were ourselves, and other half was third party. So I said, good for zero waste. Well, I can't do it, cost a lot of money. I said, don't worry, take 5 years, but have the mindset of zero waste. Design it, because you have to do it in design states. That's the most impactful thing. And so 5 years was fine with me. And if it is a little bit of money, that's a good thing, because, you invest, but here it's an investment. It's an investment for humanity, and you get your returns. He achieved that in 3 years, or the organization achieved it in 3 years. It didn't cost money in the end. It was just thinking differently and keeping waste in mind, and thinking holistically. What we found was the people were more motivated, the quality of products went up, the service levels went up. If you look at that holistically, we restored pride and dignity, in fact, in a sense, and it certainly paid out for us. And now we don't have waste. It's the same. We moved to green energy in our own operations. So very early on already, we're totally green. And people said, that never pays out. I never had an investment that needed at that time even more than 3 years payout. And now you get green energy in 60% of the world. It's now cheaper than fossil-based energy. So now that we move into carbon pricing and cap and trade systems, Unilever doesn't have a cost, because it doesn't have a carbon emission. So it's a competitive advantage now versus the ones who were just basically trailing. So my successor, who is continuing the strategy and setting the bar higher even, and the reason he's continuing it, because it's a driver of successful business. He would be killing the goose with the golden eggs if he would reverse it. But he was saying the other day that they think that they have saved about €1 billion just in thinking differently about the use of materials and decoupling that grows and moving to green energy. It's a very good business plan. It's like making investments for green energy. Some CEOs still say it's a cost. No, it's not a cost. It's an investment. First of all, an investment that is a good payout, and secondly, an investment in humanity. Don't you want to invest in humanity? Seems to me that that's a starting point. But even if this moral compass isn't there, the economics drive you to it.
Oh, I think that's a good conclusion, Paul. A very strong conclusion, and I'd like to thank you. I would like to say also thank you to people here connected today from Cape Town, Vietnam, Toronto, Lille, Geneva, all the way down to Vietnam and India. So I think that's pretty impressive. And I would like to finish just before we say the closing word. We've got 2 questions for the audience, and Morgan will share them. One is about if we were to organize a new event, another event, with another inspiring speakers like you, Paul, when would be the perfect time? Is it more like a digital breakfast, digital lunch, or digital apéritif, which is more in the evening, as we say in France? So I'll give it a few seconds, and maybe while people are asking, that's the first question, and the second, which will come right after, is the NPS score. So how would you recommend this event to a colleague, for example? And while people are answering this question, maybe can we get, Paul, from you, one last word from all those people connected? What do you want to share with us today?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more from the audience, because collectively you know more than I do. But let me leave you with one final thought, perhaps, if I have 1-2 minutes.
Yeah.
I was born in 1956 in the Netherlands, and despite the war, my parents had enough food in the house so that I was stunted. I never went to bed hungry. We had one toilet. We had 6 brothers and sisters, but I had one toilet. I didn't have a problem of open defecation. I had a piece of bar soap, so I didn't die before the age of 5. And then when it got to education, my parents insisted, because I was deprived from them during the war, they insisted that we got better life than they. They fought for peace, their communities, us being better off. And then the Dutch government paid for education. I wouldn't be sitting here and talking to you if I wouldn't have had all that. So what did I do for it? Nothing. I won in the Netherlands. I won the lottery ticket of life. So my thing to you all is very simple. If you're on this broadcast, you probably are financially a little bit more independent. You're educated. You can do and like what you want. But in the end of the day, it's only because you've won the lottery ticket of life. And if you've won the lottery ticket of life, you only belong to 5% of the world population. So if that is the case, and you feel you belong to these lucky 5%, I believe it's your duty, I believe it's your obligation to put yourself to the service of the other 95%. The The Dalai Lama said it very well when he said that if you seek enlightenment just for yourself to enhance your own causes, you miss purpose. But if you seek enlightenment to help others achieve their causes, you're actually with purpose. So my simple message to all of you is live a life with purpose.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for everyone who is connected. Thank you for Morgan for organizing this event as well. I wish you a good day back in New York, to all of you wherever you come from as well. And we'll have the replay if you want to listen back to all those questions. Thank you very much, Paul. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mathieu, and be safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yes.